Another year, another Call of Duty is what I would normally say, but this year's is a bit different. For starters, they brought back the Modern Warfare moniker after 8 long years, and then there's just the way this game looks. For as long as I can remember, Call of Duty games have been layering on top of a pre-existing framework to make themselves feel new. As extreme as the sci-fi COD games were, at their core, they really weren't all that different from the COD games of yore, right down to the look and feel of shooting and movement. At the same time, this layering approach also meant inundating these games with tons of half-hearted content, convoluted systems, and flashy gimmicks that never really amounted to much. And that's exactly why I've been cautiously optimistic about this reboot of Modern Warfare. It appears to be the first COD game in a long time that's attempting to change that base framework while also returning to the simplicity and ease of entry that made COD a household name in the first place. Whereas previous COD games always managed to look unmistakably COD, at a glance, this one could be mistaken for a modern Battlefield, or even a more simulator-like game such as Insurgency's Sandstorm. As an onlooker, the question for me before playing this beta was whether or not this perceived difference was more than superficial. Well, after playing easily a dozen hours, I'm ready to share some first impressions. According to Infinity Ward, this game is running on a new engine. As for how truly new the engine is, I don't know, but what I can tell you is that this is the first COD game I've played in a long time that feels genuinely different. Considering the more realistic, milsim-esque appearance of the game, I was slightly concerned that they might have strayed too far from the arcade shooter style, but they've actually managed to deliver something that is still distinctly COD while working in some elements from those more realistic games. The guns here are visceral and have a serious weight to them, which is primarily due to the significant amount of recoil, but also aided by more realistic sound design and slightly exaggerated first-person animations that give them an added layer of tactility. As is COD tradition at this point, the assault rifles and SMGs reign supreme, with heavy machine guns being okay and shotguns being objectively terrible. Adding an extra dimension to every gun in the game is the gunsmith system, which I thought was going to be really overbearing, but it's not. It's actually simple, and the upgrades are impactful. As you rack up kills with any given weapon, you'll level it up and unlock new attachments and perks for it. Things like scopes and lasers changed gun feel a lot for me, and I think the depth of this system is going to keep these guns feeling fresh for some time to come. Thankfully, loadouts aren't a bloated mess this time around. You get 2 weapons, 3 perks, and 2 grenades. That's it. Likewise, kill streaks are back to being kill streaks, although kills with kill streaks don't count towards your next kill streak. I was a bit taken aback by the sheer number of kill streaks though, a whopping 17. I think the reason for this is that each of the kill levels gives you the option of hands-off or player-controlled. For example, at 10 kills, you can get the Chopper Gunner, which is fully player-controlled for the duration of its use, or you can get White Phosphorus, which is entirely hands-off after you decide where to drop it. To me, it felt like the player-controlled ones were way more effective, but the trade-off here is probably the gamble that you'll be good at controlling them, versus the NPC and hands-off ones being more of a guaranteed thing, but having less potential overall. There are abilities in this game in the form of the field upgrades, but they're extremely toned down compared to, say, Black Ops 4. I only used the personal barrier, ammo box, and extra damage bullets, and while the latter two ended up being useful at times, they're not exactly game changers. Based off the descriptions in the menu, some of the higher level ones are quite powerful, but to balance things out, they have a much greater charge time. All things considered, I think the systems here are an improvement compared to recent games. They've trimmed a lot of fat and made everything more straightforward. However, what makes this game stand out for me is the combat flow, which is heavily influenced by the map design. These maps feature wide open areas and lanes that are extremely perilous, with more claustrophobic buildings and alleyways surrounding them. I tried to approach this game like I would any other COD, playing like an ape, and I was getting absolutely decimated. If you want to be successful in this game and actually rack up kill streaks, you have to be careful and intentional with your movements and positioning, since almost every position is vulnerable in some way. That design, in combination with a lower time to kill, means that situational awareness is now the name of the game. Once I wrapped my head around that and adjusted my playstyle accordingly, I was having a blast. It feels so satisfying to play well in this game, as it rewards skillful plays and punishes poor ones. Make no mistake, this can be a pretty brutal game. It almost feels like hardcore mode is on by default. Now, I'm not saying this is Rainbow Six Siege, it's not at all, but it's definitely a few steps removed from brain dead and requires much more attention than the past few COD games. To complement this more tactical approach, they've added some small gameplay tweaks that, as I've mentioned, take cues from more hardcore games. You can mount to cover, super useful if you know someone's going to peek. There's 2 levels of sprint, you can switch firing modes, and there's interactable doors. Now, one of the more controversial changes here has been the minimap. Originally, there was going to be no minimap at all unless you had a personal radar or UAV, but then they added it back permanently with no enemies being shown unless you have the radar or UAV. However, unsilenced enemy gunfire still appears on the new compass markings at the top of the HUD. Personally, I don't find those compass markings to be all that helpful, but I don't feel strongly one way or the other when it comes to enemies being shown on the minimap. In terms of game modes, I spent the bulk of my time playing classic 6v6, and this might be the first time that Team Deathmatch isn't my favorite mode. The maps seem to be made with the objective game modes in mind, and I find that this game's more tactical style meshes with them quite nicely. Domination, a series staple, plays well, but my favorite ended up being Headquarters, a mode that we haven't seen since Black Ops 2. Here, it plays like King of the Hill, but once a team captures the point, that team can't respawn until the point runs out or the enemy team neutralizes it. Holding out for as long as you can to rack up as many points as possible suits this game so well, and consequently, all of my craziest matches were in this mode. This beta also featured a ton of other game modes though, so many that I didn't even get to play them all, so I'll just briefly discuss the ones that I did. First up are the high player count modes, 20 player and 64 player. I was not a huge fan of 20 player, and it was mostly because of the map, which was a large rectangle with a small square within it, surrounded by a wide open road that acted like a moat. This made the inner square easily defendable, which wasn't fun if you were on the losing team. The 64-player ground war is literally Battlefield's Conquest, a large map with a bunch of capture points. With Battlefield not being in the best of ways right now, there's a huge opportunity here to swoop in and do it better, but in practice, it plays nothing like Conquest at all. It's basically just big Call of Duty, and it lacks the tactics and flow that make Conquest work. Then there's the 2v2 mode, Gunfight. This is the mode they used to debut gameplay, and it's intended to appeal to the more MLG esports-minded players out there, as it's essentially 1v1 me on Rust Bro, the game mode. I played it twice and don't see myself coming back to it anytime soon, although I admittedly don't fall into the target demographic. Finally, there's the novelty mode NVG, presumably short for Night Vision Goggles, which plays similarly to Battlefield 4's Night Operations. I had fun playing it, and it's a nice distraction, but I can't see it ever being anything more than that. Now, I might not be the biggest fan of the non-6v6 game modes featured in this beta, but I for one welcome this kind of experimentation. If you ask me, they've already nailed the core stuff, so I see no reason to not throw modes at the wall and see what sticks. Overall, I think this game is looking pretty compelling. Almost all of the changes are tasteful, and I can tell that thought was put into this game, as opposed to just adding things for the sake of adding them. Everything feels like it has a purpose and fits in, much like the original Modern Warfare, and with the addition of crossplay, they've potentially solved something that's plagued COD on PC for years, a dwindling player base. But there's one big concern I have, and it has nothing at all to do with what I played. In anticipation of this beta, I went back to Black Ops 4 and found that it had gone completely off the rails. There was a new ninja operator doing backflips, a guy running around insta-killing me with a prosthetic arm, and, most offensively, a whole suite of new, extremely powerful weapons that can only be obtained through loot crates. This has been a consistent pattern with every modern Call of Duty I've played. Fine at launch, but then after a few months, you come back and it's a monetized hellscape. Case in point, Modern Warfare Remastered. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like this new Modern Warfare is going to end that curse. Word on the street is that it'll have loot boxes with weapons in them, not just skins. So while I am excited for the full game after playing this beta, we'll have to wait and see if they manage to mess it all up after launch. If you're interested in seeing more gaming, peripheral, and tech videos, consider subscribing to the channel. If you'd like to stay up to date with my future video plans, the best way to do that would be to check out my Discord and Twitter, links to both in the description. Until next time, thanks for watching.